Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm the face of this channel. The main character had a court hearing against her brother. The moment she stood up from her seat, the entire courtroom went dead silent. What exactly happened? You'll find out in this episode. While listening, you can enjoy a selection of nature footage. Enjoy the show.
The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
The moment my sibling's attorney declared me mentally unfit in court, I felt I had reached the absolute low point. But then Robert stared directly at me, grinning, and announced to the judge that I was unworthy of our father's legacy. That one descriptor, unfit, caused more pain than any injury I had previously endured. Right then, I understood my relatives were not just opposing me. They aimed to completely wipe me out. My name is Eleanor Caldwell, 46, and I refused to let them destroy me. The Franklin County Courthouse in Maine smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish. It was the sort of venue where conversations were heard too easily. The rows of hard benches were filled with local people. They had come to watch the collapse of my family. As I moved down the aisle, their gazes stayed fixed on me. Each step was deliberate. My heart pounded louder than I wished. I kept my chin up, despite feeling the severe weight of their opinion bearing down. Across the courtroom, my sibling leaned close to Denise, his mouth curved into a smile intended only for my view. Denise adjusted her necklace of pearls. She nodded, acting like the final decision was already guaranteed. They appeared refined and totally self-assured. I was being portrayed as the disruptive element they needed to eliminate. The clerk spoke flatly, announcing the case file number. Years of history were reduced to a handful of words. The bailiff demanded, "All rise." The sound of moving benches broke the quiet. The side door opened. Judge Thomas Reed, 58, entered. His robe looked immaculate, his face showed no emotion. He approached the bench with the detachment of someone who had witnessed every scenario. Then his eyes locked onto mine. For an instant, he hesitated. The entire gallery seemed to pause. He murmured, too low for most, but the words still cut through the silence. "My God, it's her." A hushed reaction immediately spread through the crowd. People froze, turning their heads. My sibling's smug expression vanished. Denise's hand stopped adjusting her pearls. I was the only person who understood his meaning. That subtle change showed me this conflict would not be the easy victory they had calculated. The Caldwell homestead sprawled across the valley. It was a memory that simply refused to disappear. The fields were bordered by rolling hills dotted with red maple trees. But underneath the surface beauty, a constant stress was present. Growing up, I hauled feed and repaired the boundary lines. My father always told me to be strong and handle burdens others avoided. My sibling was never required to do that work. He was protected, forgiven, deemed too sensitive. The truth was, he just avoided work. That unfair division stayed with him, growing worse over time. When Denise, 44, married him, she viewed the property differently. For her, it wasn't about the dirt, hard work, or heritage. It represented $12 million in potential profit. She acted like she was part of the place. But her eyes always calculated the worth in cash, not deep roots. Immediately, I sensed her aggressive claim. It was an appetite for money that had nothing to do with kinship. The moment I saw the property appraiser outside, holding a clipboard and measuring the porch supports, it felt like a physical blow. My sibling stood behind the man, his arms folded. He was looking over the land as if the sale were completed. I approached, my work boots crunching the driveway stone. I demanded to know what was happening. He remained totally still. His eyes were cold when he stated, "You are complicating things. This is the truth now, just accept it." His words were worse than any curse. To him, I had stopped being a relative. I was just a hindrance to his financial plans. That evening, heavy rain hit the glass. The wind rattled the shutters while I searched my father's old office. Everything was dusty. I finally managed to open the desk drawer, which creaked loudly. My hand felt something concealed under a fake bottom panel. It was a small, worn container. I found the key inside an old book, tucked precisely where my parent knew I would seek reassurance. Inside the box, memories surfaced. There were official documents covered in dense legal language and seals. An unbreakable trust kept the property safe from everyone except me. Beneath the papers was a handwritten note from him. The handwriting was shaky but clear. He wrote, "If they ever betray you, do not yield. This property does not just belong to us. You must protect it. It is your responsibility and your defense." I sat holding the document, hands shaking. The storm raged outdoors. I realized my parent had predicted this conflict years ago. He had provided me with a legal tool and also a clear directive. I must never give up. The kitchen still carried the light smell of cedar and spices. The dining table was marked with years of family dinners and moments. This was where my mother served stew and helped me learn to cut bread correctly. That afternoon, my sibling, Robert, 42, and Denise, 44, entered. They acted like the place was already theirs. They carried many documents which they slapped onto the wood like a direct challenge. Denise's voice was sharp. Her pearls shone as she leaned closer. "This property could bring in $12 million. You are wasting it by holding onto the past." Her tone felt like broken glass. It dismissed every memory built into these walls. I steadied my hand, feeling the grain of the table beneath my fingers. "It is not wasted. It has deep roots," I replied. "You are chasing money, not land. You want to ruin the inheritance our parents left us." Robert shoved the stack of papers across the table. The legal seals and signatures slid toward me. "Sign it now. Transfer everything. Finish this fight." His voice held the certainty of someone who thought he had me trapped. I pushed the folder back toward him. The silence that followed was heavy. Only the tick of the old kitchen clock could be heard. His mouth twisted into a sneer. "If you refuse, I will prove you are unstable. Everyone knows about your file, the trauma, the incidents after your field assignments. That is enough to destroy you." Those words hurt more than the contract demand. They were not just trying to take the farm. They were prepared to smear the worst parts of my history. This was no longer a family matter. It was all-out war. Normally, the village was quiet in the morning. But that day, the local cafe was buzzing with gossip. Every table had the same newspaper headline visible: "Former federal agent unfit to manage family farm." The article was full of rumors. It claimed I was forgetful, prone to mental collapse, and dangerous with authority. When I walked to the grocery store, neighbors pulled away from me. Their eyes avoided mine. Old friends who used to wave now looked down at their shopping bags. A woman behind me whispered, just loud enough to hear, "She's changed. Something is wrong with her." Each word felt like a thrown rock. By nightfall, I had confirmation of the pattern. Robert and Denise had not just taken this battle to the courthouse. They dragged it into the streets, feeding the town lies that spread quickly. I called an old coworker. He once stood next to me during armed raids. Now he worked as a lawyer instead of an agent. He reviewed the evidence Robert planned to submit. His expression grew serious. The signatures seemed to waver. The dates did not match up. Inconsistencies piled up quickly. He set the file down. He looked straight into my eyes. "Eleanor, this is not just a family disagreement. This is fraud," he stated with finality. "If we attack them in the right spot, your sibling will not just lose the lawsuit, he will completely fall apart." For the first time, I felt a shift within myself. They thought they had cornered me, but now I had something they never expected, proof sharper than their lies. The next court date drew an even larger crowd. The benches were completely full. Reporters had gathered in the back like predators. The loud headlines had already turned everyone in town into a whispering jury. When my sibling's lawyer stood, his voice sounded falsely important as he held up a folder. He claimed it contained my medical history. He argued this was proof I had once been treated for mental instability and violent actions. Robert clasped his hands together. His face was set in a worried expression. "I just want my sister to be safe," he told Judge Reed with a gentle sigh. "And I want my father's estate protected from her bad decisions." His performance was smooth, but his words were clearly malicious. I kept my back straight and my gaze steady. I asked the court to have an independent person examine the files. The judge agreed. The folder went to the examiner. The silence in the room was crushing while he reviewed the pages. His brow furrowed more deeply with every turn. Finally, he cleared his throat. The typeface does not match hospital records. The ink shows the wrong age. The notary seal belongs to an office that did not exist the year this document was supposedly signed. Whispers started spreading in the room. Heads turned toward Robert and Denise. The solid ground beneath their confidence suddenly crumbled. By the evening, local papers were no longer covering my supposed breakdown. Instead, they asked if Robert had submitted fraudulent paperwork. Doubt was now attached to him, not me. For the first time, the critical opinion began to shift, and I sensed things were turning in my favor. The break between sessions was chaos. Reporters rushed forward. Cameras flashed constantly. Questions were shouted at us. Through the noise, Judge Reed's eyes kept finding me. His stare was not casual, it was searching. It was remembering. His eyes held a serious look I had not seen for decades. Memories came back instantly. A night years ago in New Hampshire. An abandoned building where a desperate man held a young prosecutor at gunpoint. I kicked the door open. Gunshots sounded everywhere. I pulled that man out, bleeding but alive. That man was Thomas Reed, terrified but alive because I refused to leave him there. When the court started again, my attorney walked calmly to the evidence table. He placed a picture for the record. There it was, frozen in time. Me in a protective vest, blood on my sleeve, pulling a younger Judge Reed out of the damaged area. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Robert's face completely lost color. Denise sat still, her eyes wide. Reporters wrote furiously. Former federal agent once saved current judge. The room vibrated with the discovery. Judge Reed slowly took off his glasses and put them down. He did not speak immediately. He just looked at me. It was a long, firm look. Then he nodded once. It was a clear, certain agreement. The silence that followed was more powerful than any gavel. My past and the present moment merged. This was no longer just about the property. It was about honesty, sacrifice, and justice that would finally emerge. The family fight had suddenly become a much bigger story, a reckoning that was long overdue. The final hearing had the feeling of a spectacle. Every bench was filled. Townspeople were seated next to reporters holding notebooks. Cameras were aimed and ready. The air was thick with expectation. The sound of a pen scratching echoed. I sat straight at my table. I felt every eye on me, but I refused to bend under their intense gaze. Then Robert lost control. His chair scraped the floor as he jumped up violently, his voice cracked with rage. "She is crazy," he yelled, pointing across the courtroom. "She needs to be in a hospital, not running this farm." His words were sharp and hateful. They cut through the quiet. Whispers instantly spread. People strained their necks, eager for confrontation. Beside him, Denise stared down at the table. Her knuckles were white as she twisted her pearls tighter. She avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Shame wrapped around her shoulders, like a heavy cloak. My attorney rose. He confirmed the widely reported fact. "The man in that photograph the life saved that day," he stated clearly, "sits right here on this bench." All eyes turned to the judge. Judge Thomas Reed removed his glasses. His expression was serious. He rose to his feet. His voice was steady and silenced the furious pens of the reporters. "If it were not for Ms. Caldwell, I would not be alive today," he announced. "I know the character of the woman you are trying to discredit better than anyone here." The gallery erupted with gasps and shouts. Cameras flashed constantly. Robert stumbled back into his seat, his face drained of color. Denise's eyes filled with tears. A drop ran down her cheek. In that moment, the pressure that had threatened to drown me broke and shifted. Their power, based on lies, was gone. The truth had cut straight through their performance, and the entire courtroom felt the ground shift. The press had crowded into every space the bailiff would allow. Cameras and recorders focused squarely on us, ready to capture the unraveling of a lie that had grown too big. My attorney began methodically, his voice calm but unrelenting, as he laid one document after another before the court. First, he showed the fake property transfers Robert had used, side by side with the real records. Their faults were obvious. Mismatched signatures, non-existent notaries, and dates that proved they were fiction. Then came the supposed medical reports that called me unstable. Experts testified the fonts were not used by the VA at the time. Seals belonged to offices that had not yet opened. The pile of evidence proving deceit grew with every exhibit. Across the aisle, Robert's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Sweat stained his collar. His rehearsed confidence failed as he struggled with objections. The judge overruled everyone. When directly questioned, he dodged answers and mumbled. His voice grew thin under the pressure of the facts. The courtroom could smell the desperation, and they fed on it. Then came the total surprise. Denise, who had been frozen through the trial, suddenly pushed back her chair. The noise cut through the silence. She rose slowly, her hands shaking, her voice caught. "He made me sign papers I never read," she confessed. Her words broke like glass. "I let myself believe it was business. I was wrong to trust him." The gallery gasped. Robert snapped his head toward her, his eyes blazing, but she did not falter. She turned fully toward the judge. Her shoulders were stiff with courage found too late. "There were lies," she admitted. Tears shone under the harsh lights. "I went along with them. I cannot let them continue." The shift was enormous. In an instant, Robert's careful story collapsed. It came from the betrayal of the one person he counted on. He slammed his fist onto the table, snarling, "You don't know what you're saying." But his words were empty, the echo of a man who had already failed. The judge's gavel cut through the chaos. His face was stern. The ruling was swift and unshakable. The trust was valid. The property belonged only to me. Every undermining attempt was fraudulent. Robert now faced not only civil defeat but the threat of criminal charges. Fraud, forgery, and perjury were circling him. The gallery noise swelled in shock and satisfaction. Reporters wrote furiously, knowing tomorrow's headlines would disgrace Robert, not question me. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. The burden was finally lifting. I did not look at Robert as the ruling was read. I did not need to. His silence told everything. He had lost the case and the weapon of fear he had used. I lifted my eyes to the bench. Justice had finally spoken. The truth was louder than their lies. Months later, the property looked different. It was no longer a battleground. New paint covered the siding. A new sign hung proudly at the entrance, Caldwell Resilience Center. Carved beneath it were the words my father once wrote, "Hold the line." For the first time, the phrase felt less like a heavy task and more like a promise. On opening day, the yard was full of people. Neighbors, veterans, retired officers, and reporters documenting the moment. Laughter had replaced the whispers that used to follow me. I stood before the crowd. I spoke about recovery, not loss. I talked about making a place where those scarred by service could find stability again. Towards the back, Judge Reed stood quietly. His hands were clasped. He gave a slight nod when we made eye contact. That was enough. A silent understanding that our paths had crossed for reasons beyond us. After the speeches, someone approached slowly. It was Denise. She was without her pearls and her fake smile. She held a small wooden box against her chest. Her voice shook as she offered it to me. "I lost myself in all this mess, but this belongs to you." Inside was my father's pocket watch. The face was worn smooth from his constant handling. The weight of it in my palm was heavier than gold. I looked up at the photograph of my father hanging in the hall and whispered only to myself. I held the line. The fight began with betrayal and anger. But it ended here, with justice, with rebuilding, and with a legacy redesigned for something better than self-interest.